I was one of those kids that you could spook easily. I didn't like scary stuff, scary movies, stories, ghosts, any of it. I remember many times my older sister and mom telling me more or less to get over it, and that I was just imagining things. No, it wasn't always mean like the way I just made it sound, but I'm sure they also got tired of comforting me too. Don't worry, I did grow out of that. Otherwise, I certainly wouldn't be here. But sometimes it wasn't always just in my head. Our family situation had gotten a little complicated. My mom had been through 3 relationships, 1 divorce, by the time I was 9. And we'd moved around a lot before settling into the little 2-story house where this event took place. I guess after relying on whomever she was with at the time, she finally got her own house in the hopes of just kicking them out instead, and not having to uproot our whole life each time. Believe me, I certainly preferred it. Our dad was long out of the picture. Mom had full custody, and he more or less wanted nothing to do with the family anyways. They were never married. My older sister and I shared the same dad. My little brother, however, was from the second guy she was with, the one she married, and thankfully no new ones with the last guy. I think we all had a feeling they wouldn't last, and I'm not sure what she saw in him in the first place. He was very odd. He didn't work, claiming he was disabled, but I don't know what was wrong with him considering he did everything but work. I was still a kid though, so I didn't know everything going on, I'm sure. But I know they fought a lot about him spending more money than she was bringing in. He would always talk about hitting it big, but that only seemed to enrage my mother more. He also made some weird comments to my sister, and that made me feel really uncomfortable, but my sister always told me not to worry about it because he only said it when he was drunk. Thankfully, we didn't have to deal with it much longer because the relationship only lasted about 2 years before they split. That's when we got our own place. We were actually just settling into it when they finally split, so he had been there and stayed there for only a little while. To be honest, I think my mom used him to help us move in because he lifted all the heavy stuff with ease. Then, about a month after we moved in, she kicked him out. Like I said, I have a weird family and I'll just leave it at that. Anyways, it was just the 4 of us now in our new home. My mom, my sister, Jesse, 15, my younger brother Adam, 6, and then me, 10. After finally getting more comfortable with our new home and routine, my mom shared with us that she was going to go back to school, wanting to finish her nursing career. We were all excited for her because I could just see how much she wanted it when she talked about it. Her smile was always so big and bright, her eyes glowing. If it made my mom happy, then I wanted to do whatever I could, even at the age of 10, to help her achieve her dreams. What that meant for us kids was that there were 2 nights a week where we would be alone. She would have dinner prepared for us, so all we had to do was use the microwave on those nights. The other 3 weeknights, we would just be home alone for about 2 hours until she got home. This meant that Jesse and I were given spare keys to get in. I rode the bus with Adam and Jesse was typically already home. Her school let out an hour earlier than ours. But it was those lonely nights without Mom that I would hear weird things in the house. Things that I would be told were just my imagination. I would hear these creaking sounds above us. I remember, and I don't know why, but I remember thinking, oh my god, we have rats in the attic. But my mom would laugh and say that we don't have rats. If anything, we may have mice. So, not much better, but I was scared that we had mice in our home, in our attic, since I heard it was above us. She told me it was possible since it was an older home, but since she hadn't seen any, she didn't seem too concerned about it. But something about it really freaked me out. I would always just stare up at the ceiling. Something didn't sit right with me. Sometimes it was the creaks, but other times it sounded more like shuffles. like someone dragging their feet. But again, I was told it was just the house shifting. Maybe the wind blowing something against the house. Anything they could really think to try to calm me down. But then I started noticing patterns. Late in the night, when I was in bed falling asleep, I would hear the familiar sound of someone walking up those 4 steps that led to our bedrooms. Except the sounds were coming from above. There was no way to explain that away. Those were footsteps. I remember wrapping myself in a blanket with just a sliver open to look out as I stared at the ceiling in fear. I feared something was going to fall through it and land on me, or worse, be watching me up there somehow. The ceiling was solid, so the chance of someone being able to see me was impossible, I'm sure. But as a kid, being afraid, there was no rationalizing it in my mind. Surprisingly, I shared a room with my brother and he was out cold, not awake at all to witness these things. I didn't understand how any of them could sleep through it, let alone dismiss my concerns. This happened almost every night. The same patterned thuds across the ceiling, a shuffle of sorts, some creaking, and then silence. There was even one time late one October night that I was watching TV with my mom when I heard one of those shuffling and creaking sounds. I remember looking up, and then my mom followed. I asked if she heard it too, thinking, finally, she hears it. But she just chuckled and said that it was Santa doing his monthly check on kids. Her way of trying to reassure me again. But how could nobody think that it sounded weird? The other places we lived had creaky floorboards here or there. I know what that sounded like. These were footsteps. I was sure of it. I started becoming a bit more paranoid. I would carry something with me to use as a weapon, be it one of my brother's play tools, a plastic shovel. Hell, I even stole a butter knife and kept it under my bed. If no one would believe me, then all I would do was prepare for them to attack us and hopefully help out. Jessie made fun of me when she saw me carry the shovel to the bathroom one night. She said that I was being dramatic. Old house is settled, and all I was doing was stressing myself out and scaring our little brother. But Adam seemed entirely unfazed by it all. So I did my best to not let it show when they were around me. But in my room, alone in the dark, I was terrified. Then, there was that day in late November. My mom was going to be home earlier than normal, as all she had to do was take an exam. And then she would be out for the holiday break, but that still left us with about 2 hours before she got home. Adam and I got off the bus, and Jessie was already inside, watching TV on the couch and doing her homework. My mom told us that we had to have our homework done before anything else, so we made it a habit to just do it when we got home. Adam and I were sitting on the floor, at the coffee table, working when I once again heard the sound I've become all too familiar with. I looked at the ceiling, and Jessie immediately told me to ignore it. But as I looked back down at my work, I heard a thud, followed by someone very clearly saying, "Oh shit." This time, I know Jessie heard it too. I'll never forget the look of pure terror as she looked at me, pale-faced. She slowly got up from the couch and told me to take Adam out front to play. We both headed for the door when I saw Jessie heading for the kitchen. Once we were outside, Adam went to his swing, so he was pretty well occupied, but I couldn't leave my sister in there alone with the potentially dangerous stranger. I walked back inside, and I could hear my sister talking on the phone. She was nearly whispering, but I heard her talking about the sounds in our roof, and saying that we were kids, alone. The phone was a wired landline, so she was still in the kitchen. She saw me standing nearby and said okay to whomever was on the phone, and then put it down without putting it on the receiver. She then demanded that we go back outside, and this time she followed, shutting the door behind her. Adam was plenty distracted. He was having fun without a care in the world, not knowing why we were going outside without our coats. My sister and I stood by the fence gate shivering, looking back and forth between the street and our house. Did the person in our attic know that we had called the police? Would they come out and try to harm us? Or maybe just try to run away? Finally, the police arrived, and we told them what had happened. 2 of them went in, and I remember that scaring me even more because they had their hands on their guns. A 3rd cop stayed outside with us and tried to keep us calm and distracted. Adam ran over and started asking the cop all kinds of questions, which I guess did work because it made me smile a few times. Then, everything moved so fast when we started hearing shouting from the house. We heard the cops yelling, "Get down! Don't move!" followed by more shouting. The cop that was with us told us to stand by the swing sets, and they took off into the house. And that's when we turned towards the street and saw my mom pulling up. She had barely parked before she was running into the yard toward us, hugging us. We explained more to our mom what had happened when we noticed the cops walking back out of our house. I was getting myself prepared to see them bring someone out, worried that they would see us and take revenge on us for calling the cops. I know, I was a bit dramatic, but again, I was a scared kid. What I was not expecting was to see my mom's last ex, Steve, being dragged out by the police, dirty and crazed looking. Mom looked just as confused and horrified as us. There was a lot of talking at this point. Mom and the cops, us and the cops, me speaking to another cop with my mom. Just so much talking. In the end, I could piece things together. When Steve was kicked out, he decided to take it upon himself to stay there anyway. He even took a spare blanket from the closet and a decorative pillow from the couch to give himself a makeshift bed in the attic. My mom noticed the pillow was missing, but she thought that maybe one of us had taken it, playing around, and eventually it was all forgotten about. When no one was home, he made himself at home using the shower and eating our food. There were no extra wrappers or dirty dishes, so no one noticed it, but as he did the same thing when they were together, he just had a pile of trash and dirty dishes up there too. He hardly ever cleaned up after himself. The most unsettling part of this whole thing for me was his method of coming and going. The attic door was right outside my bedroom door, and since he didn't have a key to the place, he had broken the lock on my bedroom window, so he would use it to enter and leave. It faced the backyard so people wouldn't see him. For almost a year, Steve was living in our attic. Almost a year he would watch in our room where Adam and I slept, waiting for us to fall asleep so he could leave. All those nights I lied awake, fearing that I was being watched. It was real. All those times I heard thumps and shuffling, it was Steve up there moving around, living a parallel life to us below him, and everyone said that I was just imagining things. After this, I really did have a fear of being watched, and I was even more terrified to sleep in my room and in the dark. Those bumps in the night, as kids, were always explained away. We're always told that it was just my imagination, but it wasn't just in my head. And now, as an adult, myself with 2 young children, I fear how to react if they come to me with the same concerns. I've been flipping houses for most of my life. I did it with my own father for many years and continued doing it independently after he retired. I've seen many weird things in unique homes, as well as some interesting things that were left behind. But there was one time that I found something that was actually quite terrifying. Something that I never really got answers about. This was back in the early 2000s. I had bought this property at a bank auction that had been abandoned for quite some time. The previous owner had been moved to hospice care, and with no family stepping up to handle the estate, the bank had taken possession of the home. The price was a steal considering the neighborhood and the overall condition, too. It definitely needed some care since it sat empty for so long, but structurally, it was sound. I would only need to clean the place out, do some thorough cleaning, and make a few cosmetic repairs. My first walkthrough revealed what I typically found in those situations. Some scattered personal items strewn about, a few boxes in the basement, and the usual debris of a life suddenly interrupted. It was all that I was used to seeing, maybe even less remarkable than normal, which was fine by me. After the walkthrough, and securing the required permits, I could finally begin working on it. When it comes to cleaning and throwing stuff out, I like to start on the first floor and then the basement, and then go up. This way I have a clear path to the door. The first floor was pretty clear and not worth doing more until I ripped out the carpet, so I decided to work on the basement. I knew there were a few boxes down there anyways, so I started there. The basement was unfinished but dry, with concrete floors and block walls. Nothing unusual was noted in the inspection, and to be honest, it was plenty for me. If there were leaks or cracks in the walls, it could become a bigger problem. So, being dry and unfinished was perfect. I started by gathering the boxes, and being curious, I wanted to go through them before tossing everything in a dumpster. After all, I did own the place now, so the items in it were also mine. The contents in the box started out pretty normal. There were some random cables strewn about, 2 dragon sculptures that were broken, a small plastic organizer box, think tackle box style, but in a box underneath a few sheets were some newspaper clippings about a car accident from the 80s, as well as an obituary for a woman and a man. There were some photos of 3 people. I assume maybe the previous owners, and a sketchbook with some random drawings in it. That's when I noticed something that hadn't caught my eye during the inspection. A slight depression in the concrete floor near the back wall. Looking closer, I could see what appeared to be a trap door painted over to match the concrete floor. There was a small dip in the paint, and even a few cracks forming on it. Results of a quick and cheap paint job. But this door wasn't mentioned in any of the paperwork, and I thoroughly went through it all, so I was certain the bank probably didn't know about it either. Now, I'm a pretty practical guy. After many years of renovating old houses, you learn not to jump at shadows. Secret rooms aren't that uncommon in older homes. People use them for storage, storm shelters, or bunkers maybe. And some were even used during the Prohibition era. But something about this one felt different. I pulled out my multi-tool and broke around most of the painted crevice. Then, finding the concave curved handle, I pulled it open. There wasn't even a lock. I looked down and it was just pitch black. At first glance, you couldn't even see the ground and how far down it went. I pulled out my small flashlight that I had attached to my belt, and surprisingly, it wasn't that far of a drop. Again, I don't scare easily, and after shining my light around in the room and not seeing anything dangerous, I dropped down into it. It was probably about 6 feet exactly, because I was 6'4", and in my work boots, I had to duck a bit. Thankfully, I had decent upper body strength because I didn't notice until after I dropped down there that there was no ladder. No steps to get back up. I would have to pull myself back out. I shined my light around the room, and what I saw was frankly curious and unsettling. There were deep gouges in the cement walls near the trap door, as well as in the wooden door itself, like scratch marks. The room was very small, Reaching my arms out, I could almost reach from each side to the opposite wall. The wall furthest from the door had a dark stain on the concrete and an old empty metal bucket in the corner. But even with how empty it was, it spoke loud and clear to me. It's hard to explain, but something felt deeply wrong. Something bad happened in there. I got out of there, and not wanting to disturb anything else, I called the police. Maybe I was being overly cautious, but those scratch marks and that stain, and the cover-up of the door, it painted a picture that I didn't want to think about. The detectives came, and I explained to them that I was the new owner and showed proof. They took a lot of photos, and they asked if they could take the boxes that were left, to which I agreed. They spent several hours down there, but then that was it. I was told to not do anything to the house until they reached back out. A few days later, I got a brief call saying that I was free to proceed with my renovations. They never told me if they found anything significant or asked me any questions. But I was far too curious to just let this go. I started looking into the history of the house and its previous owner. I briefly mentioned the old man who lived there previously, but he ended up in hospice care with dementia. He was once married and they had one child together, a son. His wife died many years earlier, and he was left to raise their kid alone. Here is where it gets creepy. The son had lived at home with his dad, and was a suspect in his girlfriend's disappearance back in the 80s. The girlfriend was never found, and the son died in that car accident, the one I found the newspaper clipping for, before the case was resolved. It's still listed as an open cold case. I barely found that information because of how old it was. Sometimes, I wondered if the truth about what happened to that girl and what took place in that secret room in the basement were related. Hell, I thought about reaching out to her family myself with what I found, but what would you even say in that situation? Hey, I found a creepy room and some newspaper clippings. It doesn't really prove anything. I also wondered how much the father knew, how much was locked away in his deteriorating mind. But I had no right to really pry into something like that. No matter what did or didn't happen, I'm sure two families were devastated by the events, and I didn't want to drudge it all back up. So, all I could do was what I did best. I finished the renovations. I replaced the creepy trapdoor with a proper cellar door and added some steps to it, and even installed some shelving to try and give it a less sinister purpose. The rest of the house, I completed as normal, and I didn't find anything else near as interesting as the basement. The house sold quickly to a younger couple. When I was alone with the guy, I told him about the basement because I had a feeling no one else would. I couldn't not tell them. I'm not sure that I totally believe in the paranormal, but I do believe in karma, and I'm not putting that on me or anyone else. But the guy seemed more impressed by my cover-up job than anything, and it didn't dissuade them from buying the house either. I don't want to name where the house is, or the previous owners, because even though it's been years, decades even, people still live there, and I don't want their privacy interrupted. But just knowing that I may have found out about a dark family secret, a secret that some may have taken to their grave, still kind of haunts the back of my mind. While I was in college, I tried to find cheap places for rent to live in. College took so much time that I couldn't always work full-time weeks, so it was what I could afford. In the times of Craigslist being more popular, I found a place to rent that wasn't too far from campus, and they actually advertised that it was good for college students. I set up a meeting with the owner, and got to do a walkthrough of the place. The owner's name was Roger, and he seemed like your average middle-aged guy. The place was a house that had been turned into a duplex. He talked about how he didn't need all the rooms since it was just him, so he split it. He lived on one side and put in walls and furnishings, like the washer and dryer for the other side. There were even separate doors, and the basement was split too. It looked nice, clean, and kept up with. After providing a few bank statements to prove that I could afford it, he accepted my application, and the place was mine. I was actually pretty excited to live there, as it wasn't a dorm or a large apartment with a lot of neighbors. I could actually get some peace and privacy, and I was looking forward to it. We did a final walkthrough on the day that I got the keys to go over guidelines and check for any damages. I remember calling out that while there was an access door to the attic on my side, to not use the attic due to structural concerns. He said that he hadn't been up there in years, and that the insulation was probably all over too, so he asked that I not use it. I wasn't interested in crawling through fiberglass to store some old decorations, so that was no problem for me. At first, everything was normal. No problems on either side. And I would occasionally see him when I got home from school or when I checked my mail. I remember wondering if he worked because I never saw him leave either. I didn't dwell on it, though, because honestly it wasn't any of my business, and it didn't affect me. But sometimes when I would see him at the mailbox or run into him at the store, the conversations would get weird. His conversation seemed too forced. It wasn't just a, "Hey, funny seeing you here, how are you?" It would be a specific topic. Like one time he called out to me at a nearby convenience store. He asked me if I liked doing puzzles, and at the time, I laughed and said, "Yeah, funny you mention it because I've been working on one during my time off." He started talking about how much he enjoyed them too, but that he'd been stuck on one for some time now, and then offered to have me over to help him with it, offering to make us dinner or something too. I thanked him, but declined, saying that I rarely got time off, so I would hate to make plans and then have to cancel. This wasn't a lie, but I also thought that would be too awkward. I wasn't interested in doing a puzzle with my landlord that was also about 20 years older than I was. I liked doing puzzles to unwind by myself. But he seemed to take it well, and we moved on. The conversations were always like that, though. Very specific topics that wouldn't normally come up in a natural conversation. But I just let it go. Then, there was the incident with my friend's cat. My friend Samantha had a family emergency that would end up with her going out of town for about a week. She needed someone to watch her cat, Oliver. But she didn't have many options. She lived a little over an hour away from me, and she didn't have anyone near her that she trusted enough with their keys. But I loved little Oliver. He was the sweetest cat that I'd ever met. An hour drive twice a day would be too much for me, but she trusted me enough to let me take Oliver home for the week. He's a gentle and laid-back cat, so he settled in quickly, and otherwise it was going to be a normal week. I brought him home in the afternoon on Friday, but by midday Saturday, Roger was knocking on my door. When I answered, he had a pretty concerned look on his face. I asked if there was something wrong, and he very matter-of-factly said that there were no pets allowed on the property. I didn't really think about it at first, so my first reaction was to apologize, and I explained that I was just watching him for a friend due to an emergency. I told him I would only have him for the weekend, and even made the joke that he was housebroken. He still had a concerned look on his face, but then nodded, saying that was okay, but any longer and I would have to pay extra while he was there. I again reassured him that he would be back home that following Friday, and he left. I went back in to finish my lunch, and as I do, started dwelling on that conversation. And that's when it dawned on me. How did he even know that I had a cat in there? At that moment, Oliver was sleeping on my bed, bathing in the sunlight. I had opened the curtains in my room and he seemed to love it. So he wasn't walking around in the background when I answered the door. Oliver also didn't meow. He could, but I only remember hearing him meow at Sam's place, when he was playing with his catnip toy, and even then it would come out as little whisper mews. He certainly hadn't made any noise since I brought him home. And even if he did, there was no way Roger could have heard him in his side. But he came over like that was his only intention. He didn't mention anything else but the cat. So, how could he have known? At that point, I became pretty paranoid. My parents were very strict and never gave me privacy, so it brought me back to being watched with everything I did. I couldn't close my door so they could stand and watch me play, especially when I had friends over. The relationship with my parents now as an adult is pretty strained. Anyway, I started feeling like I was being watched, but I kept telling myself that I was just overreacting. But because I couldn't let it go, I thought I would try to test my theory. I thought either I would prove that I was just being paranoid, or prove that something possibly creepy could be going on. I told my friend via text about my problem, and together we came up with the plan. She came over 2 days later to hang out, and since she smokes, she brought her cigarettes. And we both held one, both unlit, pretending to smoke. I don't smoke, and Roger made it very clear that it was not allowed either. So there was no smoke, no smell, nothing. Yet, a few minutes after holding them, there was a knock on my door. We put the cigarettes away and I answered it, to once again see a disgruntled Roger. He said that smoking was absolutely not allowed, no exceptions. I told him that we weren't smoking, feigning ignorance to the whole ordeal. But he was adamant that we were. I told him he was welcome to come in and see, but we weren't smoking. He walked in and my friend said, "What makes you think we were smoking?" But he couldn't answer. He almost mentioned the smell, but I think he realized that there wasn't one, so he couldn't use it. The only way he would have known was if he saw the cigarettes. It's not like we were waving them around outside for him to see. He left, but not before saying not to smoke or that he would charge me for a cleaning fee. After he left, my friend was just as spooked as me. How the heck would he have known? Was there a hole in the wall somewhere? Or worse, cameras? She said that we needed to look for them sooner than later, but we didn't know if there were mics too, and we were afraid to talk too loudly. So we took my laptop and went to a coffee shop nearby, and started thinking about what to do. We started Googling things about hidden cameras, the best places to hide them, or even how to find them. We read some pretty scary and disturbing things, but then we read something about organizing the cords. That stood out to me. There had to be cords attached to them for power at least, right? So there had to be a spot where it all connected. We started thinking about places they could be when I remembered Roger's comment about staying out of the attic. He couldn't possibly... could he? So, we went back home. We went to my closet and pointed out the access door. My friend pushed on it and, surprisingly, it opened pretty easily. We waited for a moment and then said the hell with it, and opened the door all the way. There was a short ladder that came down that we had to hoist each other up to get to, but once we were up there, all of my suspicions were confirmed. There were boxes strewn about, an old sheet spread out on the floor, with an old tube computer tower and monitor on it. Behind the computer were 2 power strips, both completely full. No wonder he agreed to pay for electricity. This would have been an alarming red flag. The cables from those power strips ran all over the place, connected to extension cords and other strips. We followed those cables to other divots in the wall and small holes in the floor. We did our best to map out the floor below the attic, and based on the cables, if we were correct, there was one that led to the kitchen, 2 in the living room and dining area, 1 in the bathroom, and 1 in each bedroom. I was so freaked out and disgusted. This was my home. It's supposed to be where I felt safe, but now it was the opposite. We left the attic and I called the police, not knowing what they could even do. To my surprise, there was quite a bit they could do. I had 2 police there soon after. I showed them the attic, and after that, he then walked into the kitchen and pulled down the smoke detector. I thought I was going to be sick as I watched him pull a small box with a wire attached to it. They asked us to wait outside. Poor Oliver was confused by all the commotion, so I put him in the spare room. To my surprise, Roger hadn't come out yet. They had to knock on his door several times before he finally came out. I couldn't hear what was being said, but they ended up putting him in cuffs. They told me that Roger said that he owned the place, so he had the right to install cameras. However, they told me how very illegal it actually was. If he was living in the place and had cameras, that's one thing, but he couldn't install cameras in places where other people lived or hadn't given consent. They gave me a little rundown of what was going to happen now, and then I left with Oliver to stay at my friend's place because no way was I going to be staying there. Fast forward a bit, I ended up moving in with my friend and just split the rent with her. I wanted my own place, but at that point, I would rather live with someone I trusted. Roger was charged with a few things, including stalking, some sort of invasion of privacy, and illegal surveillance. I don't know what happened to the place, but the thought that it's soiled with surveillance video now locked up in a police station somewhere is pretty terrifying. And now I still have that skepticism about any place that I rent. And, unfortunately, I'm not sure how to get past that. Hey there, friends. I hope you enjoyed today's attic and basement scary stories. If you did, please do make sure that you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. I also do ask that you leave me a comment with your thoughts and which story was your favorite or anything you want to talk about. You can also join Patreon or memberships to get early access to content like this, or listen to other platforms such as Spotify, Pandora, Apple Podcast, etc., etc. Wherever you get your podcast fix, if you will. All that said, friends, I hope you remember that you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Until next time, my friends, much love, and sleep well.